Yeah, I wanted to demonstrate my ability to wear a mask, but the other thing, I'm having a little trouble here. You guys will notice this right here. My dentist is out of having trouble, so I've had a little bit of problem with this tape right here, and as soon as that dentist gets back to work, I'm going to try to get this fixed right here. I can't, anyway.
All right, put the mask back on, Carl.
Yeah, hey, got to make you laugh at least once, but trying to be funny anyway. Hey, who says safety can't be funny?
Nobody.
So yeah, I got my coffee, Mark. I'm good to go.
I got a better cup than you do, Carl.
Hey, I got my keep it
Oh
keep
yeah,
safety
okay.
simple. Yeah, there you go. And you got your Safety Institute. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. I got my shirt on. Where's that? There you go. You got yours on, so we're good. We're Safety Instituting today. Let's see who else. Danny Sapp's out there waiting to get on, and I'll admit him. There he comes. There's Danny. Getting on. Let's see. All right. And yeah, as people come on, I'll get them. And there's Danny. Hey, Danny's at a covered bridge. What in the world?
That's in Maine.
That's in Maine. I like that. Okay, now you're getting fancy on me. You green screen guys. I guess I'm gonna have to get me one of those green screens. Who's that looking out of the window of that? Is that your wife? Or is that you?
It is. That's my wife.
There you go. And that was up in Maine.
It is. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's, you know why they have to have those bridges, those covered bridges.
Oh,
too much snow. Too much.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I used to live in Iowa.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah, and it snows in Iowa, doesn't it?
Yeah, sometimes.
Danny's down there in Georgia, right?
No, I'm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Murfreesboro, or Danny? No, the other Danny. Right?
Yeah, the other Danny. Yeah, we're down in Griffin, just south of Atlanta.
Yeah, just south of Atlanta. There you go. So down where it doesn't snow. If it snows, every once in a while, I bet it does though.
It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's usually a mess.
Yeah.
We have more tornadoes than they do anything else.
Well, you know, a few years ago, New Orleans had a snow, and they shut down school because, well, for one thing, it was too slick, I think, and the other thing, the kids had never seen it snow. It was like when it snows in hell or it snows in New Orleans, you know, kind of deal. Danny, you were going to say something. Sorry about that.
I worked a blizzard in North Georgia in '93. I guess it was '92 or '93, that blizzard that came through there and up around Blairsville.
'93. It was a big one.
Yeah.
There you go. Danny remembers that one. And there's Nona. And we got Nona. We got Steve Cunningham on here. Let's see. We got Danny Snap call a roll here. Danny Sapp, Gary, and Mark, and Steve, and Danny Range, and Deb, and Nona. And Gary's up there at the top, and we're going to hand it to him here in a minute. Let's see, what do we got? Oh, we're 2 minutes into it. Whistle bit again. Hey, Gary.
Yes, sir.
There you are. All right. So Gary is our guest today, and folks, I appreciate you tuning in here. Gary's going to talk to us this morning, and he's going to visit with us about his topic, and then we'll kind of go back and forth and get a little bit of discussion about this, and I hope you guys have some questions and comments, and I'm sure that you have some good comments. Gary will be writing those down so he can steal your stuff, right, Gary?
I got my pencil right here.
Borrow it, that's right, exactly. Get some good ideas. By the way, tomorrow, Safety Think Tank, 2 o'clock Central Time. If you want to join it, some of you've already sent me emails, so don't worry about it. I've got your emails to attend. But the safety think tank, as far as I know, will always be at 2 o'clock on Thursdays until further notice. And then Safety Institute Live, what we're doing here will be Wednesdays at noon, every Wednesday until further notice. So I welcome you to also send those links to anybody you know. The reason I'm not posting the link openly is because we got into a deal, was in a Zoom meeting the other day, and they were talking about it, that got a lot of people breaking into those. And in fact, a friend of mine was the other night, he's actually works on some Zoom iCloud stuff. And he said they're having a terrible time with people getting in. And a lot of the homeschoolers are running into that. They'll put pornography up and stuff while the kids are trying to learn. And you know what that does to those young minds. So yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? So anyway, well, without further ado, Gary Sheely, Safety Institute Associate. And actually, Gary lives not too far from me. And we're actually close neighbors here in Oklahoma. So Gary, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Carl. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with everybody this afternoon. I talk about workplace violence, and that's a broad topic. So let me break it down like the FBI does. They have 4 types. The type 1 is when somebody comes in with criminal intent, like to rob a gas station. It's an outsider. Type 2 is when it's a customer or a client of the organizations, and that's type 2. Type 3 is when it's generated from the inside. It's like worker on worker, or worker on supervisor, etc. Type 4 is when the perpetrator doesn't really have any relationship with the organization, but his targeted victim is inside the organization. I talk about the 4th one is when the perpetrator doesn't really have a relationship with the organization, but targets somebody within the organization. It's like when domestic violence follows somebody to work. I talk about type 3, worker on worker, generated from within, and the reason I talk about that kind is because managers and supervisors and foremen have a great opportunity to mitigate that type of workplace violence.
Okay.
Another thing I really wanted to get on the same page with everybody is that we hear that word workplace violence, and it tends to conjure up visions of, mass shootings and chaos and screaming and blood and police tape and all that. And the fact is that workplace violence occurs on a continuum, from acts of violence against property, vandalism, to bullying, to intimidation, to simple assault, and then even the things that make the 6 o'clock news, which are very rare. The fact is, it's these less highlighted acts of workplace violence that don't get talked about, that are in the aggregate are much more costly to American industry and to the collective psyche of the American worker than these things that make the news occasionally. 2 myths. I think this is really important to cover 2 myths. Whenever you see news reports of a shooting, and I'm thinking of in particular the Virginia Tech shooting, where Cho Sung-Hu wandered up and down the halls of Virginia Tech, and he shot 49 people, killed 49 people. The next day, a tearful young lady was being interviewed, and she said, "He just snapped. There wasn't anything we could have done." And the fact is, he didn't just snap. That's a myth. There were all kinds of warning signs that were not necessarily ignored, but they just weren't acted on decisively enough. There's almost always behavioral markers prior to such acts of violence, and Hugh had a lot of them. One more myth. Potentially violent people can be profiled, pre-employment profiled and screened out. And that's just not true. When we turn to generalizations and profiling and stereotyping to screen out potential perpetrators, instead of watching for behaviors in real time, we actually make our workplace more in danger of experiencing violence. Profiles, here's why. Profiles tend to be self-validating after the fact. In other words, it's easy to fit a perpetrator into a profile after a violent incident. But the fact is that a lot of people fit any number of the traits that are listed on these profiles, and they never become violent. So I think it's important to keep those things in mind. You really can't pre-profile your way out of workplace violence risk.
Absolutely.
But that is not true for workplaces. There are markers, and this is really what I wanted to talk about today. There are markers that identify workplace cultures that are more likely to incubate violence, and they're strong and they're consistent, and multiple studies have validated these. Let me just give you these 3 cultural markers. Number 1 is when there is a pervasive sense of injustice in the organization. And now I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Number 2 is when the culture tolerates bullies and bullying behavior. And number 3 is when there is abusive supervision. These 3 things, I call these the unholy trinity. When it comes to setting the stage for a whole range of violent behavior in the workplace. Now, one of the things that I mentioned was a sense of injustice. And I want to dive a little deeper into that, okay? Because there's organizational psychologists have found there's 3 kinds. And for our purposes today, 1 is really important. First of all, there's distributive injustice, where it's perceived as there's an unfairness in the processes, in the distribution of rewards to employees. And then there's procedural injustice, where it's perceived that there's unfairness in the processes that resolve disputes and allocate resources and that kind of thing. But the 3rd one is the most important. This is called interactional or interpersonal injustice, where there is a perceived inequality in the level of respect and dignity and courtesy demonstrated by those involved in carrying out the policies and procedures. That's a really important one.
So Gary, let me ask you this,
Sure.
stop you real quick like that and just see if I understand what you're saying. So that injustice or that perceived injustice really is somebody that they don't have any hope that they can overcome that. They can't,
Right.
In other words, because they're not in the clique or they're not in the in the flow of the information or the process. So therefore, they have nothing they can do. So they feel there's a loss of control. Is that fair?
Yeah, that would be like procedural injustice. You're describing procedural injustice.
Okay.
It's this last one though that's and they all contribute.
Right.
And my information comes from FBI studies. I've read several of those. It's this last one, this sense of interpersonal injustice, when someone feels like they're not being treated with respect and dignity and consideration in ways that other people are. And you're right, what you said, they feel like they're on the outside looking in. And all these things, these things can be, identified and mitigated. They really can. One of the most interesting things I found out just within the last few years is the role, the huge role that people in leadership have in setting the culture of, and believe me, culture flows from the top down, and workplace violence, type 3 workplace violence, comes out of the culture of the organization. I was fascinated by a study done in 1997. It's kind of a dated study, but it's been repeated a couple of times. Dr. Wendy Levinson wanted to find out what kind of a doctor, what types of doctors are less likely to be sued for malpractice. And the insurance companies were interested in her study. So she recorded and analyzed actually hundreds of hours of conversations between doctors and their patients. In the study, half of the doctors had never been sued, and half of them had been sued at least twice. although there was virtually no difference in the number of mistakes that were documented in these two groups, here's what she found out. Because you'd think that malpractice suits would be predicated upon the number of mistakes that were made, and they're not. The doctors who had not been sued spent an average of 3 minutes longer with each patient, 18.3 minutes as opposed to 15. They tended to be active listeners, and they would say things like, well, I'd like to know more about that, or tell me how you're feeling about this. They were much more likely to be humorous and laugh during the visit. Yeah. And then they made a regular practice of what Levinson called, orienting comments. Sort of like, let's do the examination, we'll talk about what we find, or be thinking of any questions that you might have before we wrap up. And the conclusions that Levinson came away from the study, they really impact our perceptions of what drives workplace violence. Malpractice litigation is not predicated on the number of mistakes or on his or her skills, but whether or not the doctor had engaged in trust-building behaviors during the interaction with the patient. Would put it in a nutshell, is the doctor likable? Right. And it's really easy to transfer this to the workplace. When supervisors, managers, foremen are skilled at trust-building interactions with the workers, the perception of injustice, interactional injustice, that precedes workplace aggression is much more likely to be held at bay.
Well, so, you know, just what you're saying, that really, it sounds like too, it's like what we in the safety realm talk about employee engagement. So
exactly,
it goes on that same way. If my doctor makes me, like my doctor will say to me, I'll say, boy, man, my joints are hurting and I feel like I'm getting arthritic. He goes, yeah, you're getting old. We're good friends. So he can kind of joke with me. Well, I like that. But he also says, well, I can give you a pill for that, Carl. But let me give you the list of things that could lead to other problems, and let's see if you want, to that pill. I got a pill so that you don't have to get up in the middle of the night a couple of times and go to the bathroom because you're getting old and you got a prostrate issue like most men have. So I can give you a pill for that, but it's going to cause these things. And he goes, it's up to you. I'll prescribe it. But at the same time, now I'm engaged. Not only am I engaged, but I'm making the decision. So how can I sue him? Well, I told him everything that was,
yeah.
Well, Judge, he told me that was going to happen, and you made the decision.
So you like your doctor?
Yeah, I love my doctor. Yeah, we're good friends and everything else, and I trust. And you said something. I trust him.
Yeah.
But if my doctor says you're going to do this, you're going to do that, I'm like, okay. Yeah. No.
Trust building behaviors, and some people are just they just do them organically, and other people can learn them. Either way, it's just a matter of being aware of how your basically we're talking about management style here, and so I don't know how many of you have read Dr. Goleman's book about management styles. Anybody out there have read that book? It's really interesting. It's kind of the gold standard when you're talking about analyzing management styles, and he describes several of them. Let me just give you the titles really quickly because I'm going to stop on the last one: a visionary style, a coaching style, an affiliative style, a democratic style, a pace-setting style, and then the last one's a commanding style. And here's what he says about that one. The last style, the commanding style, is the least effective style, but yet it's the most often used. And this is the style that it's like a military drill sergeant barking orders. The commanding leader will be critical, very rarely praise. It makes good morale and job satisfaction. Now, and you mentioned employee engagement, makes it impossible.
Right.
It is, however, very effective in a crisis when things need to change quickly to avert a catastrophe. But after the crisis is over and you still have that style, things go down. They just go down downhill. So
yeah, because during a crisis, everybody looks at whoever they think is going to make the decision.
right, yeah.
And if they're good at it, they can make the proper decision based on then turning around and asking the other people, if you got time in that crisis, to what do you think we ought to do? But
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, you're right about that. That's good.
Let's touch on bullying for a second, because that was one of the three of the unholy trinity. Bullying is about power, plain and simple. When you have peer-on-peer bullying, the bullying behaviors are designed to create an imbalance of social, psychosocial power in the relationship. And when you have a supervisor who is abusive and a bully himself, that supervisor is simply taking advantage of the imbalance of power that exists because of the difference in their positions. But you cannot ignore workplace bullying. It is so toxic that people take that stress and that anxiety and that resentment home with them. It reduces, it creates turnover. Oh man, my wife worked in a company one time when we were in college that was just so toxic that I said, I don't care if we have to eat beans every night, you got to quit that job. Organizations that fail to address bullying really are really taking a risk when it comes to the threat, the risk of workplace violence. So I don't know how many of you have ever encountered bullying in your organization?
Gary, I got a question. Would you call intimidation and bullying, would that be interchangeable to a certain degree?
It sure would. In fact, very, very, very closely related. Intimidation is just it's just what I was talking about. It's an attempt to create an imbalance of power in the relationship.
I had a manager that he was a counterpart. He didn't work for me, or neither I worked for him, but he would have these fits of rage.
Oh yeah.
He wouldn't necessarily, in a way, I wouldn't call it bullying, but he would go into a fit of rage, and you could hear him in his office with the door shut, yelling and stomping the floor, and he would get all red and everything, but he never did that to anybody that was above his level.
Yeah.
It was always below.
That sounds like abusive supervision to me. And abusive supervision and bullying are they're differentiated, among other things, by where the power comes from. Abusive supervisors are using the imbalance of power by virtue of their position, and bullies just intimidate to create the imbalance.
Well, and there is a balance in leadership. I worked with a leadership group, senior leadership group. It's been a few years ago, but one of the leaders was vice president of operations, and I was doing some coaching with him. And one of the things that when we got behind closed doors, he said, "Carl, they just don't listen to me." And he got real, and he was the kind of guy that, man, he was the nicest guy around everybody else. And I saw a side of him. He was just so frustrated, and he was keeping it down. But then he said, "Nobody listens to me. They don't deliver on time. They don't do this. They don't." And I was watching. So I said, well, one of the parts is that you're such a nice guy. When you say, "Guys, this is what we got to get done," they really don't take you seriously. And he said, well, I don't want to be, I don't know if he used the term bully. That was a few years ago, but it was a terminology like that. "I don't want to be a commander. I don't want to be this, and I don't want to be that." And I said, well, at your level as a operational VP, you have to be able to lay things out and help them understand in context why this needs to happen, what it needs to do, and you need to engage them. But one of the things that we did for him to help with this was start to put time frames on deliveries, because he didn't put time frames on it. "Oh yeah, get that done whenever," because he didn't want to push people. But occasionally he would do what you're talking about. He would just, Danny, he would just kind of blow up at people that were below him. And it was uncharacteristic, and it would surprise people when he did that. So he and I kind of worked that out, and later on, and we did some behavioral profiles with him, and that helped him see what it was without me just saying it. But the behavioral profiles did the same thing and said, you know, this is who he was. He was actually a high I on a disc profile, and loved everybody, and everybody loved him, and, you know, everybody in the pool kind of guy, you know, and yet his effectiveness as a leader, he had to manage that. He had to kind of learn how to command and not give the store away. And yet I've seen the other side, what you're talking about, that high D commander type, you know, by God, get it done, or I'm going to fire you, and threaten, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So people are fearful in the organization. They're afraid to make a decision. They don't make decisions without asking for permission. So you really can't get that, again, going back to that engagement. Like
It's engagement, yeah.
I don't know how many times I've had people say, well, you can't do that in this organization. And you say, why? Say, well, you get in trouble. You know, it makes a difference. I know Danny's probably, Danny Raines has seen that on the line side sometimes. You know, there's good rules that, for instance, ground to ground, cradle to cradle rules that aren't bad rules, and people that practice it get made fun of sometimes. And yet the organization may not have that in their rule book, but that lineman may want to use those. But if he doesn't, if he does do something, whether it be that, or if he tested his gloves every day, you know, somebody may say, what the hell's wrong with you? You know, right, Danny?
Oh, yeah. I've got a name for every one of those that Gary has described.
Yeah, a name and a picture. Just like, yeah, hold it. That's this guy. That's that guy. Yeah, we all got that. Good deal. Oh, go ahead, Gary. Didn't take it away.
Management, supervisors and managers who manage for engagement are engaging in the polar opposite behaviors of the behaviors that set the stage for violence. They are polar opposites. And what I was hoping to do is, I guess, talk about behaviors that create engagement. You know, that's a real buzzword in human resources today. But nonetheless, managing for engagement will pay off huge. And I can give you 4 things. And the first one would be, make a habit of recognizing your behaviors, or recognizing your employees. Here's the caveat. Whatever behaviors you pay attention to, you'll get more of. The purpose of recognition is to reinforce, you know, those desirable positive behaviors. And a recent book by Paul Marciano about employee engagement, he estimates that the return is nearly 100 to 1. Let me explain that. Every minute spent in sincerely recognizing your employees yields 100 minutes of discretionary effort by the recognized employee. I mean, what kind of deal is that? And yet it's not done. There's a 2011 study by Psychometrics Canada. 58 of those who responded said that more recognition by their leaders would increase the level of employee engagement in their workplace. And yet the vast majority of workers said they got little or no recognition from their managers in the last year. So if you want to recognize your employees, you got to do it right. Number one, promptly. The sooner you recognize the behavior, the more positive impact it'll have. And the best time is the same day that the behavior is observed, like right on the spot. If you have to call an employee at home in the evening, that's really effective too. Making it a part of a performance review a month later is better than nothing, but not much. Second thing about recognition is be specific. Mm-hmm. If you just say, good job, what can you do with that? The objective of recognition is to reinforce behavior, and vague expressions like that have a little effect when the employee doesn't know enough about what you're praising him for in order to repeat the behavior. They have to be able to repeat the behavior and know what it is. third, man, do it in person. Whenever possible, do it in person. Walk to where the person is, smile, and deliver the praise. That's better than sending an email or leaving a post-it note. And I guess the last one is really mean it. I mean, if you're insincere, it really is really not very effective. And I'd like to also differentiate between, and this is an important consideration too, and I'm sure all of you know what I'm talking about here. There's a difference between praise and appreciation. People assume that positive feedback means praise, and that praise is a good thing. However, praise shows that it seldom improves performance when it's based upon things that they have little or no control of. Another book I've read recently is called Mindset by a lady named Carol Dweck. Are you familiar with that one, Carl?
Yeah.
This one, I mean, it totally opened my eyes as a parent. I mean, I did things wrong as a parent. I mean, we probably all have, but
absolutely.
It divided students into two groups, and it gave them a simple IQ test. They both groups had the same test. One group was told that it got high scores and therefore must be very smart already. Mm-hmm. The other group was told that they did very well and that they must have worked hard. So one group was praised for intelligence. The other one was praised for hard work. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The students were asked if they wanted to take a little bit harder test. And the kids who were praised because they were smart were not really big on that. They were reluctant. The group that was praised for their hard work, 90% were eager for a bigger challenge. So that translates into adulthood as well, folks. It's not just kids that are like that.
Well, are you familiar with the book, The Millionaire Next Door?
Yes, I am. In fact, I have that on my shelf.
Yeah. In fact, one of the millionaires in that book lived here in Tulsa, and Bill Bartman. And in that book, he talks about that the ones that had the highest intelligence were reluctant to take challenges and fail. High intelligence or thought of high intelligence, and because they always wanted to win at something they already knew how to win. But people who are used to failing and didn't mind failing and worked hard to get out of their failure were the ones that were the most successful. He did that, and that's good. So it's a good book also to go back. It's out of print probably, but that just confirms what you're talking about here. So that's good.
Yep.
So if you give somebody and you say, boy, you worked hard, you studied the hours, or you worked real hard, then they're more likely to say, okay, so if I do more or work harder, then I'm more likely, rather than, oh, you're just smart on your own. You were born brilliant.
Exactly.
In other words, they can't do anything about that. They already got all they got.
The more you help a person develop his self-esteem rather than tearing it down, the more discretionary effort you're going to get out of that person. And it leads them in the opposite direction of the mindset that leads to violence.
So with my IQ score of 25, there's still hope for me.
There is hope for you. You just have to work hard, Carl.
Man, I'm glad to know that.
It reminds me of Bill Cosby when he was a comedian. And as he was being raised up by his mom and dad, he got in trouble all the time, and he was continuously being corrected. And he said he was 8 years old before he figured out his first name wasn't Damn It.
Exactly.
I had a dog named that once. So the first of the four behaviors, if you're trying to manage your engagement and reduce your risk, is to praise your employees. I mean, build them up. Here's the second one, and Carl, you already mentioned this. Make your expectations crystal clear. If you don't give them a target that they can say we made it or not, then there's no way to know if they were successful. One of the worst things for undermining your employees is to communicate your expectations in a vague way. And then when the employee doesn't quite meet them and you confront them and blame them for it, how's that going to help them? If you plan to hold your employees responsible and confront them for failing to meet work expectations, you need to make sure that part of the problem isn't you in how you're communicating the expectations. Make them really, really clear. I always tell this when I go out to speak. You've heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a cognitive bias. It's being talked about more and more. The Dunning-Kruger effect is when we tend to overestimate our skills at something, certain discrete skills. This study is about 7 years old now. It was a survey. 91% of those surveyed rated their communication skills as above average. Okay, let's do the math. That means that almost half of everybody you know has an overinflated view of their own communication skills, and it could be you. You check yourself. My wife's boss is a horrible communicator, and he communicates vaguely, and then when his vague expectations aren't met, he gets, kind of growly and grumbly at Kathy. Well, and so she occasionally has to slap him down, and she does. So just like she does me.
Straightens you out.
Straightens me right up. That's right. Provide benchmarks. And providing benchmarks along the way is a great way to clarify your expectations.
Well, many of us are old enough to remember that when HR started the performance appraisals. A lot of people think those have been around since the beginning of time, but they have really not at the lowest level. I think back in the 80s was when I can remember my first one, and I was in the IBEW. I was a union member and working line work and substations, and our boss says, he was mad because he had to do them, and they had a 1 to 5 rating, right? And 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. And they said, so when they got in there, you had to rate yourself, and then you go in the room and they tell you why you wasn't rated there. Well, I go in and I've rated myself on several things a 5. And they explained to me, my boss explained to me that Jesus Christ is not a 5. And I said, okay, well, help me out here. What does a 5 look like? And he goes, you don't understand. There's not a 5. I said, but it says 5 right here. Now, I'm a little bit hard-headed. You know what I mean? And after a while, he got tired of arguing with me, and he gave me some things, and I'm writing them down. And I came back later, 3 months later, I come back and I said, okay, I did these things that are 5. And he's mad because everybody would put themselves down as a 3 because you didn't have to explain a 3 because 3 was average. So I talked him into a 4. and then later on a couple of years later, I'm talking him into a 5. So it's really funny. A lot of people said, wait a minute, they said there's no 5s. I said, but they said if I did this, I'd get a 5. And so I had to prove that I could get a 5. And the thing about it is, it was a challenge. It was like you said, if you want to grade me, give me something I can shoot at. But most people were saying at that point, well, if it's always going to be a 3, then if I show up for work, do what you tell me, then that's all I need to do.
Well, when you're flying a plane or jumping out of them, it's always good to have a lot of 5s.
There you go. Yeah. or definitely.
Why jump out of a good airplane?
Oh, you haven't seen our plane.
Danny, that's right. Danny Raines is a pilot too, so be careful about that. The first landing Gary ever made in a small airplane was with me, but he jumped out hundreds of times out of them. But he'd taken off hundreds of times, but that was the first landing. And it was a windy one, if you recall.
Yeah. I think I'd have rather done my own landing that day, Carl.
Anyway, we digress. Go ahead. Number 3.
Number 3 is, I've given it my own name. I call it rigorous consideration. Rigorous consideration. I referenced that study by Wendy Levinson about, the likability factor of doctors. Well, how do you get to be likable? By practicing rigorous consideration. Employees like to know that that you're being considerate to them in a personal way, and that they're not just a cog in a machine, that they're part of a team. And let me give you three things that you can do to practice rigorous consideration. And I've done this. I used to supervise. I had a staff of 4 people that served with me. Create a conversational database. And here's what I mean by that. Use Outlook or some other program that allows you to make notes and set calendar reminders. Record your employees' birthdays, when they started with the company, any other personal information that you might have about their family members, the names of their children, and hobbies. I'm not talking about being creepy, or I'm not talking about violating boundaries, but just common information about them, their work, and their personal life. And don't go out and interrogate them, but occasionally, on a regular basis, through casual conversation, find out other things like, where'd they grow up? What's your favorite TV show? What activities are your kids? Your kids are playing t-ball? Your kid's a swimmer? That kind of thing. Second thing, engage them personally on a regular basis. Walk through the workplace. Make it a practice to engage in at least, here's the rule of thumb. Engage in at least one non-work conversation a week with every employee, based upon the information that you have in your database. Use your system, whatever it might be, to track your conversations. If you don't use a system, you're not going to remember. You have to have a way of remembering this information. The more employees that you have, the more critical this is going to be. This discipline will demonstrate you have a personal interest in your employees, and it's demonstrated to be hugely important in creating a culture of engagement in the workplace. So that's the second one. Here's the third one, and the last one. Just practice simple, considerate behaviors. I mean, courtesy. Ask, may I interrupt you for a moment before starting a conversation, instead of just walking up behind them and starting in. Acknowledge stresses and maybe griefs or problems that you're aware of, like when a family member is in the hospital or their dog dies or whatever, simple courtesies. Shut off your phone during one-on-one meetings. Learn to practice attending behaviors when you're talking. Supervisors who incorporate these subtle expressions, and they're subtle, very subtle. These subtle expressions of consideration universally report the positive effect far outweighs the cost of any effort made to practice them. What's it going to cost you to practice that? Well, nothing.
So let me get this straight. When I go out to dinner with Deb, my wife,
Mm-hmm.
I need to not pay attention to the phone while we're having dinner.
I would say so.
Is that an example of that?
That would be a good example, yeah.
No phone zone.
Deb, is that a good one?
Yes, that's a good one. That's an excellent one. For that yourself.
Touchdown. I'm learning. I'm picking up stuff.
Yeah.
See, that'll pay me dividends.
And here's the fourth one, and this is the last one. Work to create trust. And this is all about this, but this is a specific category of behaviors. Workplaces that are immunized against workplace violence, less likely to have workplace violence, are characterized by high levels of trust. Mm-hmm. Engaged workers are more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt if there is any. And it'll also expedite, if you have to have a difficult conversation, when there's trust, it makes those difficult conversations a whole lot easier. This is from Paul Marciano in the book I was mentioning. According to a Gallup study, the level of trust is a fundamental differentiator of employee engagement. Nearly all actively engaged employees trust their company's leadership. Less than one half, 46% of actively disengaged employees share that same belief. So how do you do that?
Right.
How do you do that? Let me give you several ways to do that. Number one, give information. Make business decisions as much as you can in the open. And I would say over communicate the thought processes that you went through to arrive at your decision. When you withhold information and you work behind the scenes, it makes your employees not trust you so much. The other thing is trust your employees. It goes both ways. Trust is earned when trust is given. And just tell them, I trust you can do this, or I wouldn't have asked you to do it. I wouldn't have asked you to try. The reason this works is because there's this kind of like psychological quid pro quo that comes into play. A subtle psychological pressure to reciprocate trust when we receive it from others. We want to reciprocate it, and we don't even realize we're doing it. Another one is follow through. It's real simple. Do what you say you're going to do, especially on the small things that happen every day. If you tell someone you're going to call them, then call them. The devil's in these daily small promises. You got to follow through. Another one, own your mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and everybody knows that. And it seems a little counterintuitive, but those who admit when they've made a mistake will actually earn the trust of others, while those who deny it come to be distrusted. And here's another one. Say, I don't know, if you don't. If you don't have the information that they need, just say it. Making something up so as to not look uninformed is a trust killer.
Right.
Another one I'd say is when you ask for somebody's advice, act on the advice. Act on the advice that you solicit from others, whenever possible and whenever prudent. Here's the rule, I think. Never ask someone for advice unless you genuinely think that person may have an insightful contribution. But when you ask for advice just to make them feel important, that's mildly manipulative. If you ask for advice and then don't follow it, make sure you explain exactly why you can't. And then, I'm curious as I talk about these things, somebody already said this, that you're thinking of people who have either exemplified these traits or have been just the opposite. Somebody jump in there. Can you think of?
Go ahead and ask again.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that, and somebody mentioned this already, that as I talk about these things, you're thinking of specific people that you have had experience with in the past. I'd like to hear from you.
All right, Danny's got it. Danny Reams.
Yeah, well, of course, I've been in the business for 52 years, and I've seen a lot of evolution, a lot of things happen. But I've had several positions to where I had to fall in behind some other leadership that did exactly what Gary did. They didn't build trust. They didn't delegate duties. They tried the overpowering leadership, and it didn't work. And I can remember one occasion at airport operating in Atlanta, Georgia, that I took over a headquarters, and those people were so beat down.
Oh yeah.
They didn't trust anybody. They never were delegated anything that they could do, which they could do it. They were made into pack mules is all they really were. And I got in there and I said, nope, that's not what it's going to be now, boys and girls. I said, let's do this. Well, we can't do this. We've never done that before. Oh, but we're going to start, and I'm going to help you get through it. And so we worked through it. And after about 4 or 5 months, it was a totally different outfit.
Yeah, I have no doubt.
Well, that's good. Anybody else?
I know Carl knows what I'm talking about when I say this, but I've noticed in line crews, and I've had probably at one time 100 line crews under the jurisdiction I worked in, and it was always the line foreman set the pace for the crew, always. And it was no doubt if the line foreman was a jerk, most of the crews were a jerk. Yeah. Everybody in that crew. And it's just always, and if a line foreman was a really good guy and a hard worker, that crew was a bunch of really good guys and hard workers. So it's always seems like in that particular instant, the foreman or the supervisor set the pace for the rest of it.
So it sounds like you'd agree with what I said when I said that workplace culture flows from the top down.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, you know, yeah, I had a crew foreman, and I tell this story at keynotes a lot about CT Story. And he was so, his fear was that we would believe him, we would follow him off a cliff when he was wrong. And that was because we trusted him so much. And he tried to build it so that we would question him, but we trusted him so much, he was hard to, you know, it was hard to question him. And, but he worked, like you're talking about, Gary, he worked at getting that feedback and making sure, even back years ago. And he was a high school graduate. He was not and that we didn't have leadership training and all that. He was just a good, solid country boy leader, had recognized how good behavior responded to good behavior, became good behavior. And, but now some of the stuff that you talked about here, he did. He recognized you for what he did. He would come up and he'd say to me, you know, boy, Carl, that was a really good job doing that, blank, whatever it was. But if I didn't do it right, he'd say, Carl, you know, can I show you a better way to do that? Or can I show you what I'm looking for in this job? Say it was cleaning up or something like that. So he would make that crystal clear what he wanted. And then he would come back in that praise or that courteousness, like you're saying, that consideration. He'd come back and if then you did something, he'd go, boy, that's what I like about you. You just, I mean, and that's what he did. And then last but not least, he was creating that trust. So Gary, what you talked about right there, those 4 steps are just so critical to leadership. And then let's go back to what the premise of this visit was about today, is when we're talking about reducing the bullies, reducing the bullying, reducing the fear, so that when people are fearful and they can't do anything else but attack, you know, if you push them into a corner, they're going to do one of 2 things. They're either going to, well, they're probably not going to cower. When all is lost, they're going to come out like gangbusters. Mm-hmm. And they may come out, walk out and get in their, you know, in their car and get their gun out and come back in and talk to you about it. You know, so that, or a knife or a ball bat or whatever we've seen, or a machete for that matter here in the Oklahoma City area.
Or just destroy something that belongs to the organization.
Yeah, there you go. Well, yeah, there's an old story about a guy down in the oil field that was getting bullied around, and he dropped a hammer down in one of the well holes, you know, it was down deep in one of those deep ones, you know, 10,000 foot hole. Well, they took a fishing tool and had to fish that hammer out. When it came out, the hood, the head came out with barely any of the handle left, but the foreman handed him the head, and he said, well, you might as well take this to your next job because you're fired. He said, I won't need that, and he just tossed it right back down in the hole. Oh, no. Yeah, so anyway, well, Gary, any last passing thoughts? We're kind of dragging.
Yeah. A lot of times I go out and people want to hear about, you know, tactical de-escalation, you know, how to tactical confrontation. And that's fine if they want to hear about that, but I'd a lot rather talk about what you can do to never get there. That's much more important. It's in my mind.
Mitigation strategy.
Yeah, it's much better to have a mitigation strategy than to come to the end of your rope and have it all on the line, and you're depending upon your de-escalation skills. That's so, you know, that's what I'd like to, you know, leave you with. Focus on mitigation rather than getting out of it after it's already happened. it's a lot more important to not ever get to that point of needing those skills.
There you go. There you go. Well, Gary, I appreciate it. And maybe what we need to do, we need to have another call sometime and talk about the media strategies, but tactics for once you've got to that point and you can't do anything, how do you de-escalate?
Yeah,
we'll
that's a whole different conversation.
Exactly. That's another hour, isn't it? Or more.
Pretty close.
So, yeah, exactly. So, and I know you do that, and your book's available. By the way, anybody that's interested, safetybooks.com, you go out there and Safe at Work, I believe, is the name of the book.
Yeah, Safe at Work.
Right. Safe at Work. And that's available at safetybooks.com if you're interested. Don't want to get in a sales zone here, but it's a great book by Gary Sheely, and we'll be more than happy to get that out to you. Any other comments before we close out today?
Excellent program, Gary. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. This has been great. This is only about the third or fourth time I've used Zoom, but man, Carl, thanks for teaching me how to use this stuff.
Absolutely. And for everybody here, Danny Raines there. Danny and I have known each other for a long time. We've passed paths. We go like this. Danny was a lineman, line foreman, operational supervisor. I don't know what all kinds of things. And he travels the world like I do, working with electric utilities because of our background. So Danny and I have shared the stage at the International Lineman's Rodeo and gosh, at different places all over the place. And I sometimes they'll ask me, you know, Danny? I said, oh yeah, I know that good old boy. So yeah, and I appreciate Danny. And I think we kind of get compared to each other from time to time, but I really appreciate the work you do. And then Danny Sapp's there, and Danny's done a lot of good work like that. And Mark, we appreciate what you're doing up there, keeping those farmers moving. Anything going on in the farming community up there that we need to know about? Get Mark on there. There he is.
Well, not that I know of. I've been working from home, so I really don't see a whole lot of activity, but I'm going to venture out this afternoon, just kind of go around a few locations, probably stay in the car, social distance, but just get a feel of what's going on. I feel so separated from everything this way. So,
do you think there was some good steps right here that you'll be able to think more about when you go out to visit?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the employee recognition, you know, and I've kind of gotten away from it, but I used to always carry a box of leather gloves in the car, and I'd go out and I'd see an employee doing something right. I'd say, here, have a pair of leather gloves.
Good idea.
For nicer ones, they're probably not going to be work gloves. It's something a little nicer that they could wear in their personal life or whatever, for maybe a little dressier, or they can throw them in their car so they have a flat tire. You got a pair of gloves there, just that type of thing. So
something they don't have to buy.
Good idea.
So, yeah, exactly. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's go to Steve Cunningham. Steve, you're down, let's see, you're in, well, tell us where you're at. I forget.
Okay, I live in West Virginia, but I work out of Marietta, Ohio. Of course, we're working from home. Yeah, I could see, I like to think that I try to use a lot of the things that were brought up today. I work for Solvay Chemical, right? Solvay Specialty Polymers now, but I used to work for American Electric Power at generation plant. And I went to work there, and the safety manager right before me had just fired 2 people. And I had a hard time talking to myself, let alone talking to anybody else. So it was pretty much of a struggle for a few weeks, but I think I gained the trust by using a lot of the principles that he brought up. I'm interested in that book as well, in his book. So, yeah, and you know, once you gain that trust, and it's priceless after you gain that trust. You can do it. You can sure do a lot with that, and people will really come to you and open up, and had some really good experiences there. So, anyway, I appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you.
Your book.
And by the way, I'll on this presentation, and I'll try to send this to everybody. If the recording comes out good, we're recording this with Gary's permission. We'll post this on Vimeo, and I'll send everybody a link to that, and you'll be able to share it around, and so that people can see that. If that's and if that's okay. Anybody here have a problem with that?
Nobody on the witness protection program, evidently. So.
Oh, that'd only be Danny Sapp. He's in the. I mean, no, just kidding. But good, Dan. Well, hey, all you coming from Oklahoma, appreciate you tuning in. Again, we will be up 2 o'clock tomorrow for the Safety Think Tank. You're all welcome to join that. Send me an email and request a link to that. Carl@safetyinstitute.com. Also, if you have any questions about Gary, right here, Nona@safetyinstitute.com. Nona@safetyinstitute.com. She can hook you up with some information. Go to safetyinstitute.com. Take a look at Gary's information if you'd like to. And with that, I appreciate everybody and hope you all make it a safe day. And we'll hopefully see some of you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Adios.